Hey everybody, my name is Deja and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going over all the books that I read in the month of February. Starting in January for all of 2025, I decided to do my wrap-ups in a crochet and chat format where we basically, or I should say, crochet and talk to you guys about the books that I read. So it's like a wrap-up, but I'm crocheting at the same time, and I'm working on my ratings blanket, which means that every single row in this corresponds to the rating for the book that I read, and I honestly have not worked on February at all. This is just January. I plan on doing probably like half or more depending on how many books that I read, so by the end of the video we are basically like finished with that month. But this month was just so crazy. I did not have time to work on the blanket. I don't really think I crocheted much at all. If you want the details to know what yarn I'm using, what stitch, all of like the project details, that is going to be in the beginning of my January wrap up, so go check that out if you want to know the details of the project. In the month of February, I ended up reading 10 books. I tried to do multiple reading vlogs, readathons. The readathons kind of flopped. I didn't really do anything for the readathons, but I did end up filming 2 reading vlogs. One of them I finished up in March. I have not even started to edit that one. I don't know if I'm going to post it because I feel like I didn't really like how it turned out, but I don't really know because I haven't started to edit it. I may post it over on Patreon. It's just me reading cozy books. The other vlog that I filmed in February and ended up posting was my boyfriend picks what I read, and so I posted that for Valentine's Day, obviously in celebration of that. 6 of the books that I read this month were ones that I own physically, and then one of them was from the library, so I feel like I did pretty good on physical books this month. I'm going to be copying in the covers for all the books because I cannot hold up a book and crochet at the same time, but here are the 6 books that I do physically own. Now let's get into my stats really quickly. I read 10 books, as I said. 4 of those are by BIPOC authors. 3 of the books had queer representation. I didn't have any rereads or DNFs, and I read 2,888 pages, an angel number 888. In February, it was kind of surprising because I didn't read any horror, versus in January, I read 8, and I was also participating in a Black horror readathon, but I wasn't in a horror mood. Technically one book was like marked as horror, but I thought it was more speculative. So for genres, I read 1 fantasy, 1 literary fiction, 1 magical realism, 1 mystery, 1 nonfiction, 1 romance, 1 speculative, and 3 thrillers. So I read kind of a little bit of everything. And then for format, I had 6 audiobooks, 1 ebook, 1 physical book, and 2 hybrid. Then for audience, all 10 books were adult books. And then for ratings, I had a 2.5 star, a 3 star, 2 3.5s, 4 4 stars, 1 5 star, and 1 that I didn't rate because it was a nonfiction. I don't rate nonfiction. And then for type, I had 7 novels, 1 novella, 1 short story collection, and then 1 graphic novel / manga. And then for author status, I didn't have any that were debut authors, 6 that were new to me, and 4 repeat authors. So again, this month I read a lot of new to me authors, just like last month. Last month I realized I didn't even organize my books how I normally do. Normally I go through them lowest rated to highest rated, but last month I guess it was so long since I did a wrap up that I didn't even think about it, and I just went down my spreadsheet and talked about them in the order that I read them, but I prefer doing it by ratings, so we're gonna go back to that. So my lowest rated book for this month was actually one that I read with my book club. It was our January book club pick, and I gave it 2.5 stars, and that is Beautiful Ugly by Alice Feeney. I was really excited for this book because I really like Alice Feeney's work from what I've read, but this one kind of disappointed me in a lot of ways. I do have a full discussion on it over on my Patreon and a reading blog if you're interested in any of our book club picks, but this one just did not really do it for me. I know a lot of people have been liking it, but it just really wasn't for me. In this one, we follow our main character. He is a writer, and his wife went missing, I think like a year prior to this book starting. He has not been able to write since she disappeared, so he ends up going to this remote island off Scotland to try and write. His agent basically like pushes him to go there so he can write another book, of course, because obviously she would want him to write another book. And he thinks that he begins to see his wife everywhere. And this one, I did really enjoy the atmosphere a lot. I thought the atmosphere was honestly the best part of this book. It was kind of like this really isolated island, and I liked those vibes a lot, but the plot twist in this one just did not deliver for me at all. I thought that they were pretty obvious for the most part. There were a couple that I thought were pretty decent, but they really were not anything like super spectacular or crazy to me, and we did not really get any twists or anything in this book until like basically 90% of the way into this book. So the first 90% of this book is just build up and like this man thinking that he's seeing his wife. Like we did not get any real twists until 90%, and then even then it started probably around like 80-85% where we start to like learn a little bit more information. And it's like those type of books where it'll be like, oh, I'm about to reveal the twist, and then it'll end the chapter and then like do a flashback or something, and then you come back and they're like teasing the twist again, and then it ends the chapter again. And so for like 10% of this book, we were being basically edged, and I was like, can you just tell me what the twist is? Like, I really did not like the fact that we kept being teased that the twist is about to be revealed by a character and then it not being revealed, and it kept getting like pushed off and pushed off. Like, I really did not enjoy that at all. And I didn't really feel any attachment to the characters. I know that not always in thrillers are we going to have attachment to characters, because a lot of the time thrillers are just not like super character driven. They can be, but this one just wasn't. But a lot of them also aren't, and this was not one that was super character driven in general. But we also were in the main perspective of a man, and that's not always my favorite. I didn't hate it, but like, it was just fine. Overall, I thought the book was just fine, which is why I gave it 2.5 stars. I didn't dislike it. I thought there were pretty good elements, but a lot of it was also kind of lackluster. And if this was not for my book club, I may have honestly DNF'd it, just because I felt like 90% of the book was literally just build up, and I wasn't that interested or entertained. I was just like, okay, like, what's the twist gonna be? Like, just tell me already. In my vlog, I said that I like my thriller to be like one of three things. I either like it to be super twisty, I like it to have really good commentary, or I like it to be super dark. And this was really none of those things to me. So it was just fine. It was just okay. I like Alice Feeney's other work much more. Daisy Darker is my favorite, but I also really enjoyed Rock, Paper, Scissors. So if you enjoy those, I think you would still enjoy her other work, but this one was just not for me. Next up, with a 3-star, I read this little novella called Renew You, and this one was kind of interesting. It's an indie published novella by a Black author. It kind of could be classified as like horror or sci-fi. Like, I saw people putting it on the horror list, which is why I picked it up, but I just marked it as speculative because we don't really know what's going on in the story. But this one basically follows one main woman, but I think there's a group of like 4 or 5 of them that end up coming together, and it takes place in the 90s in New York City. And these Black women specifically begin to kind of develop this rash that is unknown, like they don't know where it's coming from, but it ends up being caused by this hair product called Renew You, which is specifically targeted at Black women because it is like a hair relaxer kind of product at home, and it's causing this mysterious rash slash outbreak, and it's like being transferred to other people of different races who didn't even use the product, and some people are ended up dying and stuff like that. So we're following a group of like 5 women, all of different ages, who met at the CDC or a hospital, I believe it is, because they all came in with this rash and nobody was really paying attention to them, so they ended up leaving, and they created like this bond, and they're trying to figure out like what's happening to them. The reason I'm giving this one 3 stars is because I thought this one had a lot of really good commentary on like hair and how important hair is for Black women. I really loved that, and like seeing all these Black women come together from all different walks of life, I thought that was so interesting. But I really don't know like the point of this story. Like, there really like was no plot, no type of resolution. Like, what I told you is the same information that we know at the end of the story. Like, we don't begin to really learn anything. We don't know how any of this happened. Like, I feel like there could have just been like a little bit more plot. Like, I feel like this was a really interesting idea, and it really wasn't like executed story-wise. It's a really good concept, but the author didn't really know how to write it or fully flesh it out to be a full story. I would still recommend this one because it is so interesting with the hair concept, but don't expect like any type of resolution, which I know like there are some books that are just meant to be open-ended and have resolution, but I don't feel like the author meant to do that on purpose. Like, it didn't feel intentional. It just felt like they didn't know how to necessarily accomplish what they wanted to do. Something else I really did like about this story though was that it did have like mixed media elements relating to like documents and stuff that the company who created Renew You were doing, and it had like news reports and stuff like that. I really liked those elements, and I thought they added a lot to the story. So I would recommend it if you want something that talks a lot about hair and is kind of like horror or speculative, but don't expect to get like the best fully fleshed out story. Now we're moving on to my 3.5 stars. My first one is The Inmate by Frida McFadden. I've never read a Frida McFadden book before. Obviously, we all know allegedly that she's a plagiarizer. Like, even her most popular series, The Housemaid, is allegedly plagiarized from The Last Mistress Parish, which I have read and enjoyed. It was like a domestic thriller. I think I gave it 4 stars. I did really like it, but it wasn't anything like crazy to me. But I know people love Frida McFadden, said that she has really good popcorn thrillers and stuff like that. But I feel like she honestly has been kind of like falling off lately, because Frida McFadden was like a good gateway for a lot of people to get into reading and thrillers. And now that people are like more invested in reading and have read more, that Frida McFadden is just like not necessarily really doing it for them. This one follows a woman who is moving back to her hometown after the passing of her parents. She has a son, and she is a single mother who got pregnant when she was in a high school, which is kind of like a big part of the story. She talks about a lot about how her son was like bullied and stuff in school for like being a bastard basically. And I was like, I don't no, like, he's literally in elementary school. Like, I don't think that would really happen. But regardless, she's moving back to the small town, and she begins to work as a nurse in this prison. The big shtick of this book is that when she was a teenager, before she found out that she was pregnant, she was involved in this massacre where one of her friends went and killed a whole bunch of her other friends. And the friend that killed her other friends is actually her baby daddy, and he is in this prison. So she's now working in the prison that her baby daddy, who killed a bunch of her friends, is in. And so he is the inmate, aka the title of this book. And this one was fine. It was pretty engaging. Like, it was super fast to read. I think I listened to the audiobook when I was doing my nails, and I finished a book and then completely started and finished this book because it's just super fast to read. And I read this one also for the Boyfriend Picks My Books vlog. We went to the used bookstore and he picked this one out for me to read. Because if you haven't seen that vlog, basically 2 of the books he picked from my like shelves that I have here, and then 1 book he picked from the used bookstore. So it was very quick to read. It was pretty engaging. Like, the writing is just so easy and digestible that it kept me very like interested in the story. But most of the story really wasn't anything crazy. I feel like the twist that we saw at the end was something that we've seen before in other media. Like, at least I've seen it in movies before. But then there was like an end twist, like right at the very, very end of the story, that I loved. I really liked that twist. Overall, it was just a very fast-paced read. Like, I think if you want something that you can read on like a flight somewhere, I think that this one would be like one that you could definitely do that with. I wouldn't necessarily recommend Frida because she is a known plagiarizer, and I feel like there are much better thrillers out there. Again, you're looking for something that's really quick, that's going to keep you engaged, like, on the story, because I know like a lot of people are scared of flying. If you want something that's going to keep you distracted, I feel like this would be a pretty good one. My next 3.5 star was Tales from the Cafe. This is the second book in the Before the Coffee Gets Cold series, and this one was one that I was reading for that Cozy Books vlog that we'll see if it actually gets posted or not, but I gave this one 3.5 stars. I do like these because they're super fast to read. All of the ones, at least of the 2 that I've read, I'm pretty sure it continues on in the rest of the series. They are basically like a collection of 4 stories, and it follows this cafe where there is this one seat, and one time a day, the woman who sits in the seat, who is basically like a ghost, gets up to go to the bathroom. And when that seat is empty, someone could sit in that seat and travel through time. They can either go forward or backwards, and they can talk to whoever they want as long as they've actually visited the cafe. Like, they need to be in that cafe at that moment to be able to speak to them. Obviously, they could just time travel not to talk to people, but most people do it to talk to people. And so most people do travel into the past because they'll know, like, oh, this person was in the cafe at this time, versus in the future you don't know if the person will actually be in the cafe at that time. But they are allowed to be in that seat wherever they want to be in time, as long as it takes for their coffee to get cold. And so we're following a lot of like heartfelt stories of people who are grieving or lost something, and they are trying to like talk to their loved ones, or people that they've never even met before but that they know that they're gonna have a connection to. And this series is pretty good. It's really heartfelt and heartwarming and heartbreaking at the same time. And these stories, I know objectively, are pretty like emotional and have a big emotional impact, but for me personally, they don't necessarily. Like, objectively, as I said, I know, oh, like, this is really emotional, like what this person is going through is a lot. But because there are 4 stories per book, I feel like I'm not like super invested into each story as much as I would like. And I don't know, maybe if the writing was different. This is a translated book, but I do enjoy the writing. I don't know what it is. I just don't emotionally connect to the stories, but I enjoy them and I appreciate them for what they do. Like even this one, I couldn't tell you any of the 4 stories that I read, and I feel like a lot of collections or even books that I read that have an emotional impact, I can tell you, oh, like this is why I was emotionally impacted, or I could remember like a little bit about it at least. I cannot really tell you about anything that happened in the majority of these stories at all. Maybe a little bit of information, but that's how I know they didn't really like impact me heavily, is because like I don't remember them. Like I don't remember anything. But as I said, the writing is really good. They are like really emotional to read and it's super quick. So I would recommend this series to people. I think a lot of people will really like it, and I do like it. I do enjoy it. It's just not as emotionally impactful for me as I wish they were. Now moving on to my 4-star reads, which I had 4 of this month. The first one was Saga Volume 11. I can't really talk too much about this specific volume because it is volume 11, but this is like one of my favorite graphic novel series. Usually I give each volume like 4.5 or 5 stars. I do have like 1 or 2 4 stars, and this one was like a 4-star for me because I feel like it was kind of like a filler in the series. I feel like the next one is going to be phenomenal. I'm completely caught up on the series as of now, but I think there is another volume coming out in just a couple months, so I definitely will be picking that one up. Like I love the series and I will keep reading it as long as it comes out, unless it goes like really downhill for some reason. But I love it. Like I think it's so good. And this one is very heavily fantasy sci-fi, which you know is not really my thing, but I think because it is like a graphic novel, it's so visual that it's easy for me to like keep up with the characters and the worlds, because visually I can see the characters and the worlds. So I do really like it. In the beginning of the series, we are following a couple that are both soldiers on opposite warring sides of a war, and they are literally different species. I think they're called like the horns and the wings. So like one of the species has horns, one of them has wings. Now this is like 2 opposite sides. It's like an intergalactic war, but in the beginning of this, we're following just this couple, and they find out that they are pregnant. Because they are warring sides and different species, they are technically like committing treason. Basically, they're not allowed to have like any romantic relationships, any type of relationship period, with someone from the other side, let alone have sex and procreate with them. So now they're kind of like on the run to try and hide their child and protect their child from this war. And that's like basically what the story follows, and it gets like way bigger, a lot more characters, but I feel like it's really easy to follow because it is so visual and I love it. Some of the volumes have definitely like broken my heart, literally, but I love the series. I can't wait for the next volume. I think it's gonna be so good. Like each time I read one of these, I'm like, I need the next volume. And they took a years-long hiatus not too long ago. They just came back from it a couple years ago, and that really pissed me off because I was like, how are you gonna take a hiatus in the middle of the series? And I just really love it. It's so fun, and as I said, I will definitely continue to read the series as long as it's coming out. The next 4-star that I had is The Jigsaw Man, which is a thriller. I also read this for my boyfriend chooses my books vlog, and this one was a really amazing crime thriller. It's written by a Black author, which I don't know of many like crime serial killer thrillers written by Black authors, which is why I wanted to pick it up. So that's why I'm so glad my boyfriend picked this one out for me. We're following this woman investigator in the UK. She just came back from leave because she actually was involved in locking up this serial killer called the Jigsaw Man, and she got injured in like, you know, taking him in and stuff like that. So he's like in prison now, everything like that. She's coming back from her leave, and now begins a copycat killing of the Jigsaw killer. Like there are specific things about his MO that they never released to the public that this copycat killer is doing. And so she is now trying to investigate and figure out, who is this copycat killer? Are they connected to the killer that's in prison? Like, is he having someone on the outside? Are they completely, you know, separated from it? And this one I gave 4 stars because I do love a crime thriller. I feel like if you like Criminal Minds, if you like stuff like that, this one definitely is very reminiscent of that. But I do think this one was quite long. Let me see. It's almost 500 pages. So I feel like it was a little bit long because especially at the end where we were supposed to have like a lot of payoff from these twists, I just was kind of like over it a little bit because I was like, this book is so long, like it did not need to be this long. But I did still really enjoy the book. I thought it was really well executed, really well written. I enjoyed our main character. She's very flawed, but I like that about her. And my only other complaint is that I do wish that we kind of had like a prequel or another first book in this series where we follow like her locking up the original Jigsaw killer, because it kind of felt like a sequel. This is actually a series, but it continues from here. It just felt like a sequel and that we should have had had the original story of locking up the Jigsaw Killer before this one, but the author did a good job at like keeping us up to speed. I wasn't confused at any point on what happened. It was just that like I wish we had that like prior knowledge ourselves and like we actually got to read it versus being kind of told it afterwards in this story. But I would really recommend it if you like crime thrillers. I know a lot of people don't like crime thrillers. I feel like domestic thrillers are more popular, but I'm definitely like a crime thriller, like serial killer type thriller girl. So if you like those types of thrillers, I think that you would really enjoy this one a lot. My next 4-star was Shady Hollow, and this one I read for that Cozy Books reading vlog as well, and this one was super fun. Like I really liked it. It's basically a cozy mystery with woodland creatures. So these creatures are basically like humans, but they are creatures as well. So like they have jobs, they have like a human organized type society, but they are still animals. Like I think there's even like a squirrel or something in this book, and the squirrel has like litters of children and has had like 50 children because they've had multiple litters with their wife, but they have wives, they have jobs. So we're following our main character in this, and she's actually a journalist in this small town of Shady Hollow, and the curmudgeonly toad in this town ends up getting killed, and so she is trying to investigate and figure out, you know, who killed this toad, because things like this never happen in the small town of Shady Hollow. And I thought it was so fun, like seeing all of the creatures, and there is actually like a character list at the beginning of this book, and I really liked that. I really enjoyed referring back to that because there are like 16 or 17 different characters in this story, and I feel like cozy mysteries honestly like need to do that, because I don't think I've ever read a cozy mystery that had that. But normally in cozy mysteries there's so many different characters. When the twist is revealed on like who killed the person, most of the time I'm like, who even is that? So I really would like it if cozy mysteries started to include that, so then I could be like, oh, like that's who that person is. And so I really liked the twist in here. I thought it was fun on like what happened at the end, and honestly for being like this cutesy like woodland creature cozy mystery, the kind of like twists and like what was going on in the story was a little bit like darker than I expected. Like what's happening with these animals was a little bit darker. And so I feel like if you like cozy mysteries and that show Over the Garden Wall, I feel like you would really like this story a lot. I thought it kind of combined like those two things of like kind of like a cozy mystery like classic town with kind of like the creaturey, oh, like cozy but a little bit kind of dark vibe of Over the Garden Wall. And so I think that if you like that show a lot and you like the cozy mystery kind of small town and tropes, I think you would really like this one. It was so fun and I highly recommend it. And my last 4-star was The Storied Life of AJ Fickery, which was also read for that Cozy Books vlog. In this one we follow our main character AJ Fickery, and he is kind of again like a curmudgeonly character who runs this bookstore, and he has this beloved tome of Edgar Allan Poe's poems and tales, everything that he's written in this bind up, and it's like super expensive and it gets stolen from his bookstore. And then right soon after he gets this like special delivery on his doorstep, and it doesn't really say, and I've never heard anybody talk about what the delivery is, but I feel like it can really like make or break if people are going to enjoy this story or not. So I don't know, like I'm not gonna say it, but I would recommend looking it up, and if you want to know what it is, then ask me, because I feel like a lot of people don't like this element in stories, but I really do. So I liked it. I feel like even friends of mine may not like this story as much because of what it ends up being, because it's not like what you would traditionally think it could be. I feel like this kind of reminded me of like The Grinch in a way, like with AJ Fickery being the Grinch and his heart gets warmed slowly over time. And this book spans a lot longer than I thought it would. We follow a lot of AJ Fickery's life, and there were some really sad things that ended up happening, but also a lot of heartwarming things that ended up happening. And I feel like this is a really great literary fiction. I love the bookstore vibes. I loved like that package delivery, like whatever you want to call it. I loved that element so much, and I feel like it added a lot to the story. Like without that, it wouldn't have even been the story that it is. I loved that element. I feel like I loved like the Grinchy element of this one, and it was just so like heartwarming and touching. I really enjoyed it, and I highly recommend picking this one up as well. I forgot to mention the book that I did not rate because it's nonfiction. I don't know if I should do them like at the beginning, before like the 1 stars, or at the end after the 5 stars, but this book would have been a 5-star for me if I did rate it, so I thought I would just plop it in here before the 5-star. Plop it is crazy. But that is Finding Me by Viola Davis. This is a nonfiction memoir written by Viola Davis about her life, and I love this one. This one was also in my boyfriend picks what books I read vlog, and I highly recommend go checking that video out because I had so much to say about this story. There's literally like one clip that I had just talking about this book that was like 15 minutes, not edited. It was crazy of me just talking about this book because I had so much to say on what was happening in this story. So I really would like if you guys should go check out that video because I really liked what I had to say in there, and I don't even know if I could articulate what I said as well as I did in that video. So this one follows Viola Davis, which if you don't know her, she is an award-winning actress. She is amazing. She comes from a very impoverished background. She is Black, and so that is a big topic of this story, but also just like how she grew up. She literally did grow up in the hood. She grew up poor, and she had 2 other sisters. Her parents had a very toxic, abusive relationship. She was bullied for being Black by other kids. She went through a very hard life in the beginning, and even later on, she had some very hard things happen to her later on. She talks about her career, how she got into acting, but then also like her life afterwards and like some of the adult struggles that she went through, and you know, like talking about being a Black woman in this industry. And I just loved this memoir so much. I thought it was so touching. Obviously, memoirs are very personal, but I feel like the way that Viola articulated her story was phenomenally done. I highly recommend the audiobook for this one especially. I mean, for most memoirs, they are read by the author, and so I feel like it's really good to hear someone's story from their own mouth, and I really loved that one and this one. I feel like Viola Davis, especially because she is an actress, she has a very amazing way of expressing her emotions and tone through her voice, and I feel like she did that expertly in the audiobook. I feel like it's so impactful. It's very inspiring, I feel like, for a lot of people to read this type of story, and even if you don't relate to Viola and where she came from, I feel like you would still gain inspiration from this story, and you can still gain a lot about what it's like to grow up in this situation, because even me, I'm very privileged. I do know people, even my own mother, who grew up in a very similar situation to Viola Davis, but like hearing specific stories and hearing it from her mouth, it was so impactful for me, and I feel like I can't even express how wonderful this memoir was. So please pick it up. I love it. It's so good, and Viola Davis is incredible, phenomenal, spectacular, amazing. So you guys should really pick it up. So the last book is a 5-star for me, and I was really surprised by this one because I did not expect to give this one a 5-star. I previously read 2 other books by this author. I read a 2-star and a 4-star by her. Spoiler alert, this one was a 5-star for me, and that is Funny Story by Emily Henry. Again, I read a 2-star and a 4-star from this author, and I didn't think I would ever be an Emily Henry girl specifically, so I was really surprised when I loved this one as much as I did. In Funny Story, we follow our main character, Daphne, and she is like a very buttoned up kind of type A scheduled woman, which is definitely like me. I relate to her a lot. And she has a fiance, and they are literally about to get married like very, very soon, but he ends up breaking off the engagement because when he goes to his bachelor party, he ends up hooking up with his childhood best friend, who is a woman, and tells Daphne that he wants to be with her and not with Daphne. So Daphne is now like, what the fuck? Like, I'm literally alone. I started to pay for this wedding. The wedding's not happening. Like, the wedding was literally about to happen and now is not. Like, it literally, like, he could have done this a little bit earlier, like a little bit further before the wedding. Like, it had to have been like a couple weeks before the wedding, if that. The childhood friend that her fiance hooked up with also had a partner, and they kicked Daphne out of the apartment where she lives with her fiance so that the childhood friend could move in, and Daphne has nowhere to go, so she ends up living with Miles, who is the partner of the childhood friend that Daphne's fiance hooked up with. And the only reason that they are together in this apartment is because they both lost their partners and they have nowhere else to really go. Miles obviously needs someone to help pay rent. Daphne has nowhere to go. She was literally kicked out. So they end up just like kind of getting together. They don't really talk that much at first, and Miles is very opposite of Daphne. He's very like chill, laid back. He works at like a is it like a winery or a brewery? He's very like chill and relaxed, and very opposite of Daphne, but they begin to kind of spark up a bit of a romance. What I love about Daphne too is that she's actually a child's librarian. I love that element of the story. That's like a big part of the story, is that she's at work and she is a like kids librarian, and I loved that element so much. I love like books and stories. I love bookshops, I love writers, I love editors, and I don't think I've really read much with librarians, so I really liked having her as a librarian, especially like a contemporary story librarian. I feel like a lot of like librarian stories are like magical realism or fantasy, but this one is like a real librarian in real life, and I really enjoyed that element. And Daphne also begins to realize that she doesn't really have a life here. She moved to this area specifically for her fiance, so she doesn't really have friends, she doesn't really have a life, and so she begins to make friends and make a life, and she develops a really good relationship with one of her coworkers that I loved. I loved her coworker so much, and I just love this story. Miles was so cute and amazing, like the way that he was so understanding of Daphne, and they did kind of have like a miscommunication thing happen in this story, but I feel like it was understandable on both ends on why it happened, and I loved it. Daphne has a really tough history when she was a child, and so does Miles. He also has a history, and I love seeing them come together and overcome their differences and their past and their struggles. It was just so heartwarming and cute. It gave me the same feelings as when I read Abby Jimenez for the first time, or The 7-Year Slip by Ashley Poston, and I love those two books so much. I don't know if I love this one exactly as much as I love Abby Jimenez and The 7-Year Slip, but it's definitely up there. It's close for sure. As of now, this is in my top books for 2024. I could see it being knocked off the list depending on how many 5 stars I have this year, but I really did like this one, and I wasn't expecting it. So if you are not a Emily Henry girl, but you haven't read this one, you might like it, especially if you like Abby Jimenez or Ashley Poston. I think that this one's really comparable to that one, not in like the magical realism way like Ashley Poston, but I feel like the feelings are very similar. So those are all of the books that I read in February. I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. I did not make it very far on this. I haven't even finished this row, but I think this is only the 3rd row that I've done, so I still have 7 more to go after this, but I promise in March I will be more caught up. I have spring break in March, so I'll definitely keep up with this. Let me know down below what your favorite book of February was so I can potentially add it to my TBR. If you made it to the end, leave a little fox emoji down below for Shady Hollow, and I will see y'all in the next one. Bye, everybody. In the kitchen, soaking in moments we live in, yeah. You got the nerve to be on me, taking a life out of IG. If you got my number, don't have me, 'cause baby,